G'day everyone, and welcome to School Health Presents Tools to Advocate for Health and PE Funding. My name is Danny Rad. I'm the PE specialist for the West. I'm joined here by Tom Stringer, the PE specialist for the East, and Ron Mom from Focus Fitness. We're all super excited to have you here with Dr. Morton. And just before we begin, I have some housekeeping. We will not be taking audio questions, but you can submit your questions via the question interface in GoToWebinar. You can submit your questions anytime during the presentation. Dr. Morton will be taking 45 minutes for a presentation, after which she will take all questions received. This recorded session will have a link and be available to you for future playback. If you're having difficulties of any type, just go to webinar directly at 855-352-9003. Now that we're through that, it's with my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Kim Morton. Dr. Morton, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Oop, let me just put this back there. There you go. Hello, everyone. It is an honor to be here, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. Thank you, Danny, Tom, and Ron from School Health, Palo Sports, and Focus Fitness to allow me to share my story on how I obtained local, state, and federal funding for health and PE and physical activity programs. My goal today is hopefully just by sharing my experiences, I can help you and others obtain the funding that they need for health, PE, and the physical activity program that they seek for their school or school district. I know Danny has already shared a little bit about the features of this webinar, but let's go over the two essential functions that we're going to use throughout this presentation, and that is the chat box and the question box. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to ask 3-4 questions that you will submit your responses using the chat box. Now, when you use the chat box, you can see other people's responses. At the end of this presentation, roughly around 45 minutes, at any time, you can submit a question using the question box, and I have saved time at the end to be sure that I reply to most of the questions. If I do not get to one of your questions, don't worry, we will follow up through an email. Thank you for being here, everyone. Let's practice these features. All right, everyone, finish this sentence. And you're going to reply by placing your response in the chat box. So using the chat box, if you were provided with $500,000 in school funding, what would you spend it on? Give you about a minute to respond. Look for that chat box feature and type your response in the text box. If you were provided with $500,000 in school funding, you would spend it on And Ron, if you want to shout out any of those responses that you might be able to see in the chat box feature.
Not seeing any responses yet, Kim.
Okay.
I think people are going to sit on this for a bit.
Ron, we do have responses that are coming into the questions box. I'm seeing, Dr. Morton, that we have technology HR monitors is coming up.
Okay.
Heart rate monitors, all new equipment, but an outdoor multi-purpose sports field. So we're seeing some responses coming in that nature.
Okay, so then those are submitted in the question box, chat box. We'll just be sure that we're monitoring both of those features. Anytime when I ask or pose a question throughout this presentation, if you want to see other people's responses, use the chat box. Question box will be used at the end for that Q&A time at the end of this presentation. All right, let's begin with my story. My story, I'm going to start in 2014 working as a health and PE curriculum specialist in a large urban school district in Charlotte, North Carolina. In 2014 to now, that's about 8.5 years, while serving this large urban school district, I have had 5 superintendents, 9 supervisors. Let's think about that. I've been in my large urban school district for 8.5 years as a curriculum and health PE specialist, and I've had over 9 supervisors. That is over 1 supervisor every school year. I serve over 400 health and PE teachers, and I get the opportunity to work with 4,200 K-5 classroom teachers. And the reason why I include classroom teachers who I serve is because there's a large part of my job that I help classroom teachers with active classrooms, kinesthetic learning, sensory labs, etc. So I also help and support them along with our health and PE teachers. Our enrollment in my large urban school district is 210 schools, and we have fluctuated in attendance with student enrollment. When I first started in 2014, we were at the high end of 150,000 students, whereas after the pandemic, like many other school districts, we have lost some attendance. So right now we sit right at 141,000 students. That makes my urban school district number 17, the 17th largest school district in the country right now. My health and PE district funding. Let's take a look at that. This is the local and state funding that I get annually. Starting in 2014, when I first got my job as a health and PE curriculum specialist, my operating costs were $24,000. That's it. $24,000 in local and state funding. 8.5 years later, my funding has decreased to $16,000. And this is what my district says is a fair estimate to cover all the operating costs for health and PE and physical activity programs. Let's really break that funding down. If that truly is my operating costs, out of my 210 schools, that equates to $76 per school I have to spend. Or we can look at my funding this way. Out of my 406 health and PE teachers that I have this year, I have $39.40 per teacher. I spend more money myself in instructional resources than what my county provides for me for health and PE annually with state and local funding. My reality, truly, I have enough money to buy every health and PE teacher a whistle. Well, maybe I could buy a Fox 40 whistle. So where did I start? I didn't have a lot of money. I needed to start somewhere in 2014, and I refused to allow my dire financial circumstances limit me to executing quality health, PE, and physical activity programs. So when I started in 2014, I first assessed all the curriculum resources that we had in the district. What do I have? What do I need? And then to identify the gaps. When I started 8.5 years ago, we did not have a scope and sequence. We did not have a standards aligned scope and sequence with grade level objectives and national standards. So I created one. I knew then, without a scope and sequence and without a curriculum map, district leaders weren't going to pay attention to us. They weren't going to take health and PE seriously. I needed to create these documents similar to ELA, math, and science has to support their teachers and their curriculum. Along with that scope and sequence document, I got started of curriculum mapping to ensure that all my teachers understand what needs to be taught by each grade level and by every high school elective course. These essential documents then help me craft up equipment district standards. And what I mean by equipment district standards is, what should every elementary, middle, and high school need to deliver effective health and PE? So I created a list of items and products and instructional resources. This is what elementary PE needs to deliver effective PE instruction. This is what middle school needs, this is what high school needs, and these are our health education needs. And those equipment standards then become the standard of what every school should have across all my schools. In other words, if I have a middle school that has this equipment, then this other equipment across the county should also have this equipment. So that's where I started. This did not take any money. This is just where I want to be sure that I had these documents so that district leaders would prioritize and value health and PE. Without them, they weren't going to value us. So we needed these essential documents. So that's basically what I did the first 1.5 to 2 years as my role in the health as a health and PE curriculum specialist. I also wanted to be sure in my first 2 years that I embraced a team focus. I wanted all my health and PE teachers to understand the mission and vision we had for health and PE. And I was laser focused on my approach. People first, mission always. People first, mission always. I went out and I wanted to develop relationships with anyone in the district. Relationships with zone superintendents, the superintendent, executive directors, support services department, budget, accounts payable, principals, teachers. I knew if I did not build relationships and my interactions and how I communicate with the people in my district, I would fail my mission. So my focus and my approach for funding and to advocate for health and PE has always been people first, mission always. If you fail to build relationships, you will fail your mission. I also want to create a lot of noise. So in order to get attention, I made sure that I branded our health and PE programs. What I mean by branding is I took to digital marketing and I advocated using several social media platforms. So I used Twitter. I used also Facebook group pages at the time. I'm now starting to use TikTok and Instagram Reels. But I use social media platforms to post articles highlighting the importance of health and PE and why movement matters. But I also use social media platforms to show the positive things that were occurring in our schools regarding health and PE. I want to celebrate all the good stuff that was occurring. And when I would post on social media, like Twitter, I'd be sure to tag Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools or tag other key influencers in my district that could also see, this is some cool stuff that's happening in our district. This is really good PR. I also presented everywhere. I presented to school meetings, district leadership meetings. I presented at state and national conferences. I presented everywhere. And not only did I present on health and PE, but when I presented to schools and in my district leadership meetings, I presented on topics that were outside of health and PE. Some of my presentations that got attention was one called Sticky Learning, which is about how to engage student learners, or choice-led classrooms. And these are sessions that all K-12 educators can embed in their own instruction for effective delivery and for appropriate student learning that engages students. So I made sure, okay, don't just do health and PE trainings. Go outside and do trainings that pertain to all educators to help engage student learners. So I went everywhere. I also knew in order to brand health and PE, I had to collaborate with other departments outside my health and PE department. For example, I collaborated with, we had a department called personalized learning. We also have a department, student and support services. Those are two departments that are aligned with a lot of the same goals that I had for our health and PE programs. So the first 2 years, I want to produce documents to gain value for health and PE, and to also get noticed and to make other people aware of the things that we were doing and the good things that we were doing in health and PE. But this is so great. This is so great. Not only did I want to explain to people, to explain to district leaders, to explain to staff, to explain to those decision makers on whether a funding is going to get approved or not, I want to show them how movement feels. I want them to feel the joy and the laughter while moving. So one of these tactics that I used, I know it's unconventional, but this has been a really good advocacy tool for my funding, is that I ended up doing things, physical activity opportunities for district leaders to participate in, to feel the benefits of movement. Take a look at this video. I know, unconventional, but the purpose was to get noticed and connect with those decision makers. In that video, I had people from accounting, budget. I had one of the chief of staff, financial administrators. I had research department, accountability department take place. And the reason why I did that is so that if they were part of a committee that had to vet budget proposals, when they saw one of my requests come by, maybe they would just score that a little higher because they felt the benefits, why movement matters. So I know, I created vision and mission statements, important documents. I did physical activity opportunities, but some of you may be wondering, okay, how did you really acquire the big time dollars to grow your budget? Because this current school year, you know, my annual budget was only $16,000. And I refuse to let those financial circumstances get in my way to ensure that every student in my district has quality health and PE, and teachers have the necessary resources to deliver effective instruction. So looking back in my 8.5 years, I reflected back on some of the budget proposals while I was putting this webinar together, and I really had time to reflect and say, why did it work for me? How did I truly grow my budget? So I created this ABCD funding formula, because this ABCD funding formula, when I look back at some of my budget requests, have these elements that help gain approval. So the A stands for align. Anytime you write up a budget request, it is an absolute must to include district strategic goals into your messaging. Use the district strategic plan messaging, use school improvement plan messaging, so that those who are making the decision, they see that you're aligned with the district and school goals. Budget source. And what I mean by this, don't just ask for a funding or ask for funding in one of your requests. State what funding source you are requesting. For example, if you are requesting, let's say, I want money to support professional development for health and PE teachers. My request would say, I am seeking Title II funding to build the capacity of my teachers to deliver appropriate health and PE instruction. The C, compelling story. This is all four of these funding formula is truly important, but compelling story has been one of my greatest victories. Make it hard for them to say no. No is not no forever also. So just because your funding maybe request was denied one year doesn't mean it's going to be denied the following year. Make it hard for them to say no. Tell a compelling story, and within that story, put in some of the data, especially local data, to identify gaps and needs, to be able to provide a rationale why district leaders should approve your funding proposals. So looking back throughout the 8.5 years that I've been as a district health and PE curriculum specialist, and actually looking back at my 19 years as a practitioner, as a elementary, middle, and high school PE teacher, I think back at this formula, and this is exactly what I did to convince my principal to give me instructional resources. So it's been successful. So let me take you down a journey, my scrapbook, let's call this, of some of the funding that I got approved. Now remember, when I first started my position in 2014, I only had $24,000. This school year, I only have $16,000 in my operating costs. So I really had to seek out other federal and local state sources of revenue to get the needed instructional resources or training for my health and PE teachers. So in 2016, I wrote up a proposal to get $250,000 for functional fitness equipment for all of my high schools and all of my middle schools. That was approved using some of the tactics that I've just shared with you to get local funding for that equipment. In 2017, we were in dire need for elementary PE equipment. So I received $330,000 in local funding to ensure that all 110 elementary schools received $3,000 to spend in PE equipment. In 2018, my proposal for $360,000 was approved for weight room equipment that some of my high schools were honestly a liability concern to me, and they needed to be upgraded with basically safe weight room equipment to hopefully reduce student harm and to be able to use. So I received $360,000. In 2019, I convinced district leaders, hey, I really need staff development and curriculum resources. So they gave me Title II federal funding, $67,000. And as you can see in this picture, we had a stellar training staff that came to my district to provide quality professional development for all 400 plus health and PE teachers. In 2020, this is my greatest victory. I was able to convince, during a pandemic, when I submitted the budget proposal and I presented it to district leaders, don't worry, I'm going to share this story with you later. I got $2.4 million for PE equipment for all my elementary, middle, and high school. And that funding came from local funding. Look at the pallets of PE equipment behind this happy, joyful PE teacher, because she has the necessary resources to deliver effective PE instruction. This past year, this has been a project that I truly had to show grit and perseverance to get this federal funding. I had to convince district leaders that I needed to renovate more high school weight rooms. I asked for $405,000 to renovate 4 of my high schools that, again, were in dire need, had safety issues, could be a liability concern in the future. And I sought out ESSA Title IV Part A funding. Now, it's interesting with this project this year, even my own federal funding department, I had to convince that health and PE is a well-rounded course, and ESSA Title IV Part A funding can be used to buy necessary PE equipment. Now, of course, when I had federal funding dollars, you have to go through appropriate purchasing guidelines. But I really had to be gritty, and I really had to sort of push and convince and show legislation and policy that I even just Google searched online and showed that to my federal funding department to say, yes, yes, health and PE does qualify for ESSA Title IV Part A funding, and I got it. $405,000. And those weight rooms are currently in a purchase order, and they're going to be renovated and transformed starting June 1st over the summer. Take a look at that state-of-the-art weight room. Has a strip of turf, it's got racks, it's got connecting bridges for functional fitness and TRX type of exercises. This is equipment that will last 18, 20 years, quality equipment. But I also collaborated with school principals. School principals are the greatest advocate for our health and PE programs. Seek those principals out that truly believe that movement matters and that active schools can make a positive school culture. So I collaborated with a principal to install some of these active hallway decals and also create some sensory labs. We call them B3 labs, brain, body, behavior labs. And I worked with this principal, and I did the funding proposal for her to get Title I funding because she was working at a school that had a large percentage of high poverty, low income students. Title I is for high poverty, low income students at certain schools. She was a Title I school. She did not have time to write up a Title I proposal. So I said, I'll do it for you. And we got the funding. So if we take all the funding that I just shared with you through 2016 to now 2021, my scrapbook of, let's call it funding achievements, that equates to $3.8 million. A lot more than that $16,000 of operating costs that I am provided annually. I knew I needed to seek out other revenue sources to be able to get those projects funded that I just shared with you. So let's really look and tear apart this ABCD funding formula. Let me provide you some examples of what I mean. A, I already shared with you, align with district strategic goals in all your messages. So in my school district, we have 4 important documents that are aligned to our district strategic plan. We have our playbook, what matters most, the CMS way, and we are ready documents. I have these next to my computer. I have these in my laptop bag. I carry these with me all the time because at any point when I have to submit a funding request, I'm tearing apart some of those messages that lie in these 4 important documents, because if I don't include that messaging, district leaders will not pay attention. So let's say I was seeking out curriculum that I needed for every student. So in one of my budget requests, my proposals, I looked within our What Matters Most document that has these 3 statements included in it. In my school district, we guarantee a viable curriculum for every student. Okay, I'm seeking curriculum resources. If we say that the district is guaranteeing a viable curriculum, I'm putting that in a budget request because we didn't have one. We also personalize learning for students, and we want to increase social, emotional, mental health resources. So that was some of the messaging that I included in one of my budget proposals to get curriculum and some PE equipment resources. I received local funding to purchased the functional fitness equipment, but also some focused fitness curriculums that we added into our WellNet. We included video library, online learning, e-curriculum, and brain body boost. We had a lack of curriculum that I needed to fill that void, so we were able to purchase some more modules so that my teachers had the instructional curriculum resources plus the functional fitness equipment. One budget proposal that I submitted for funding was I really highlighted the need to be able to train my teachers to deliver quality health and PE instruction. In my large urban school district, I constantly have teacher turnover. We currently have a labor shortage right now, and staff training is essential. In fact, some of the teachers that we're employing right now to work in health and PE don't even have a health and PE license. So it is crucial that I provide that professional development training. So if I'm seeking out professional development training funding, I'm making sure that I'm including these messages that are included in my district strategic plan. Messages such as, we believe in guaranteeing every student has high expectations, high quality resources, and high performing teachers. So if that's one of the district's beliefs, then I'm going to place that in my funding proposal to ensure that I am able to provide instruction, professional development to produce high performing teachers. If the district believes in deep investments in training and professional development, I'm going to put the exact wording in my district funding proposal, and I had success. I scored Title II funding to be able to provide that professional development training and workshop expenses. Some of the training that I got, I really want to go out and teach K-5 teachers how to embed movement, how to have an active school culture. On the right-hand side, I had health and PE teachers that learned how to set up a sensory lab and to be able to deliver instruction for students to help them regulate their emotions. So I got that Title II funding, but I made sure I aligned it with our district messaging. Key, key, key. Use the district's words to help get your funding approved. So if the district also believes in achieving and maintaining a health enhancing level of physical activity and fitness, and they understand the value of physical activity for health, enjoyment, challenge, self-expression, and social interaction, as stated in our district strategic documents, I use those messaging in my funding proposals, and I scored that ESSA Title IV Part A funding. This is one of the ways that I scored that ESSA Title IV Part A funding is through that messaging. And as I shared with you before, I was able to renovate some of the high schools that were in dire safety need. This just looks so awesome to participate in. I can't wait to see the weight room renovations that take place over the summer. All right, so thanks for just listening to a little bit of my ABCD formula and how I was able to align with district messaging. Let's just process some of that information now. Using the chat box.
Kim, the chat box is disabled. It's not working, so people will have to put their responses in the question box.
Perfect. Okay, so let's use the question box, everybody. And then Ron, if you're able to see some of the responses, if you just want to shout them out, just varied responses, feel free. So using the question box, what are some focus areas or priorities in your school district? Let's just take about a minute to answer that question. What are some focus areas or priorities in your district? And use the question box.
The field area.
Okay. I know in my district, equity is a huge focus, social emotional learning,
We've got getting funding for our new campus, how to
Okay.
use those ESSA funds,
Okay.
understaffed PE health,
Mm-hmm.
develop common curriculum documents across the district.
Ooh, you can use that one for sure to get some of your funding requests. Think about some of your district initiatives, some of the things that they're prioritizing as a school board, as a school district for student learning. And then how can you use some of those focus areas or priorities to fund your health and PE programming?
We have more individualized needs of students met, test scores, cross curriculum, being well-rounded individual, STEM.
STEM. So all those responses, just having an understanding of some of the focus areas. Be sure that you're having a real sense of what your superintendent, what your school board members, what the community, what stakeholders are prioritizing, and place them in your budget request. Be sure to include that messaging. You're more likely to get funded if you include some of those high priority areas. Thank you so much for responding in the question box. Thanks, Ron. So the second part of the ABCD funding formula that I found to be successful is B. So let's explore B, budget source. I explained earlier, when you write up a budget request, state the budget source that you're requesting. State, in order for, let's say, the staff training, I said use Title II funding. Or let's say that you want to, for PE equipment, maybe you're using the ESSA Title IV Part A funding. Or maybe you're at a school that has a high percentage of low income students, high poverty students. Maybe perhaps you could tap into Title I funding. So to truly understand the budget source, let's really explore some of those federal budget sources. Most of school districts, the education is primarily funded by local and state funding, okay? However, there has been historic federal budgets that has been passed, especially during the pandemic, that is providing funding to school districts that you really need to be aware of. So let's look at and break down these federal budget sources so that you have an understanding how these budget sources can be used and what for. So Title I, already shared with you, those funds go to low income family or low income schools with a high percentage of high poverty students. So that is financial assistance to certain schools. Title II, think of Title II funding, staff development, coaching, mentoring, beginner teacher support programs, workshop expenses. Title IV, Part A. This is that federal funding source that I shared with you earlier. I had to sort of go to battle in a good way with my federal funding department to say, yes, health and PE has access to these funds. Those funds can be spent on curriculum, PE equipment, student resources, evidence-based PD, registration costs, let's say to go to conferences, your travel costs. It could also go to salaries and benefits. Then this historic funding that has been provided to school district is the ESSER II funding, and then the American Rescue Plan ESSER III funding. Let's just call this the COVID relief funding. ESSER funds can be used for the following ways. COVID-19 supplies, the PPE supplies, summer learning. I know a lot of school districts provide summer learning or extended learning opportunities to make up for the learning loss. You could expend it on technology, after school programs, addressing the needs of low income students, but these funds expire, and this is important. These funds expire and must be used through September 30th, 2023. So the funding that's allocated to your school district, find out how much you're receiving for ESSER II funding and make sure that it's spent, because you don't want to leave dollars on the table and give it back to the federal government. American Rescue Plan, ESSER 3 funding. 20% of that federal funding must address learning loss. It must address activities caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. You can implement public health protocols, and funds can be used through September 30th, 2024. So, Title I, Title II, Title IV, Part A, those are ongoing federal budget sources until maybe the Elementary Secondary School Reauthorization Act is maybe allocated differently. Those Title I, Title II, and Title IV Part A funding, those are annual federal budget sources under ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act. The ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, the American Rescue Plan, those are the COVID relief funding. Let's just stamp that and label them as COVID relief funding. Those expire, and thousands of dollars are returned each year because schools or school districts do not spend the funds. Don't leave those dollars on the table. Be gritty, find out the budget sources that you can have access to and have rights to for your health and PE programs. So in the question box, think of a funding request you currently have. Think of a funding request you currently have. What budget source is most aligned with your request? Think of a funding request and put this in the question box. What budget source is most aligned with your funding request? Title I, Title II, ESSA, Title IV Part A, or you could just simply put COVID relief funding. ESSER 2 or ESSER 3 funding. What budget source is most aligned with your funding request? It's important to know your budget sources so that when you write up a budget proposal, you just don't ask for the funding. You're asking to use a certain budget source to provide the necessary dollars for that program, resource, product for health and PE. State the budget source.
Title II and American Rescue Plan, ESSER 3.
Okay. And just remember that those ESSER funds do expire. So really reach out to that federal funding department to be able to have access. Tell them what you want the funding for and what budget source you are seeking to get for that project.
They're coming in now.
Okay.
Looking at IHT heart rate monitors to help monitor the students' SEL levels, going to use ESSER, Title IV Part A, Title IV Part A for equipment and staff development. Title II and Title IV-A is another response. Can lower the PFT scores, work towards American Rescue Plan, ESSER 3, towards the learning loss. Title IV Part A for resources for outdoor SEL, student activities.
Fantastic. That sounds like it's perfectly aligned. That technology with the heart rate monitors, you could tap into, you know, even the ESSA Title IV Part A or the ESSER funding, because that ESSER funding should be also used for that technology as well. So you could also state maybe one or two budget sources in your funding requests to your district decision makers. All right, thank you so much for your responses. The ABCD funding formula, perhaps I think one of the most important parts of a funding request is to tell a compelling story. Again, make it hard for them to say no. This is my greatest budget victory story ever. I cannot wait to share it with you. Last year, and this is how I got that $2.4 million for PE equipment. Last school year, I asked all my elementary, middle, and PE teachers to inventory what equipment they have in their storage PE equipment closets. But before I asked them to inventory that, I provided the district PE equipment standards list of what every elementary school should have for PE, what every middle school should have for PE, and what every high school should have for PE. And they reported back to me. They counted every basketball, every beanbag, every poly spot, etc. We were Team CMS HPE for this budget request. And after I got all that data back from all of my schools, this was a huge task, everybody, but my greatest funding victory. I then took all that information, I put it into an Excel spreadsheet, and I want to analyze the data. I want to know how many schools are below standard for each PE item. Now, every elementary school should have 88 PE equipment items, middle school should have 71 items, and then high school should have 52 items on our district PE equipment list. So I had to do that for every single item, how many schools are below standard for each PE equipment item. Then, using the Excel data tools, I figured out how many do we need to be compliant with the district standard across the entire district. So I figured out if this school needs 5 basketballs, this school needs 8 basketballs, this school needs 15, this school needs 20. I calculated that all up and figured that we needed to purchase 618 basketballs to be compliant to the district standard. That's how I figured how many we needed to purchase. Then I estimated the cost of every single item to get a total cost, how much it would cost the school to bring us to cost the school district to bring up to district standard for middle, elementary, and high school PE. And it came to, excuse me, that $2.4 million. Huge, huge victory. When I presented it to my district leaders, and it was over Zoom, it was over an online meeting, I wanted to tell a compelling story. And I really highlighted because SEL, social emotional learning, was a priority and a focus area in my school district, especially since the pandemic. And I told the story that we cannot fully address a student's social, emotional, mental needs without addressing their physical needs. We can't do it. So then I shared with them our current reality. If we're really being serious of addressing students' social emotional learning needs, then we have to address their physical needs. Therefore, that we need to bring the entire district up to district standard in PE equipment. And when you are provided with this slide deck link following this webinar, feel free to click on these folder icons so that you can see those inventories of every grade level. But let me give you a snapshot of what my Excel spreadsheet looked like when I gave it to my district decision makers for funding. I'm just giving you just a screenshot of just one of the pages. In column A, let's call this, I had my 20 high schools. In row 1, I had all 52 PE equipment items across the row. And it continues. This is just a screenshot. Down below is how I use the data Excel tools to get my numbers to cost of each item, how many we needed, how many we had, etc. But how I really told the story and showed the deficits in my school district, any school that was below standard, that did not have the district standard for a particular PE equipment, that cell turned red. So look at all the cells that are red right now. So when I presented this to district leaders and said, hey, if all teachers are supposed to have a viable curriculum and instructional resources to effectively deliver quality health in PE, We need to be sure that we're providing the necessary resources to do their job. This is how far behind we are in PE equipment funding. And it got approved. My greatest victory funding story ever. It was one of my favorites. So think of the funding request you currently have, like the heart rate monitors. What story can you tell to get district attention? What story? And put that in the question box. How can you get their attention? Think of that funding request. What story can you tell to get district attention? And Ron, if some of those stories are coming in, feel free to share.
Not yet, Kim.
Okay. I know that's a lot to process, and this is probably one of the most challenging things to include in your budget request is what story, not a fake story, a real story can you tell to get district attention? Another one I did this previous school year is I shared with my associate superintendent of academics, I said, since the beginning of the school year in August, we have hired over 60 new health and PE teachers, and 78% of them do not have a license in health and PE. I must provide professional development for these teachers to ensure that they are delivering standards aligned quality health and PE lessons. Now, when I told them that 78% did not have a license, that's when they really paid attention to me. And they said, what do you need? Not how much, they just said, what do you need to make it happen?
So Kim, in our limited time left, there were some responses I want to share.
Okay.
The story we can tell is how our building needs upgrades or build out our new one due to lack of basics like water not working at times. Technology use is another one, STEM and helping students and teachers understand their learning needs. Another one was equity, low socioeconomic status campuses not getting the materials needed. Another one was what kind of equipment did you use when your students were at home? Looking at local chronic health data and how this equipment will address it. Having heart rate monitors will motivate students to work at higher intensity levels, higher brain functions, and better moods. Not safe for these children in this children's communities, for the students to go outside. We need enough supplies in our schools to get them moving in school during PE class.
Perfect. Great. Especially when you talk about the safety of kids and how much they need to move in school because they may not have safe spaces to play outside in their homes. Fantastic. Now, this last part of the ABCD funding, and I'm about to wrap it up, is I've already shared with you that I've included data, maybe in my compelling story, the budget source, and aligning it with district strategic goals into my messaging. But here's an example of what I did one year to get that functional fitness. Back in 2014-2015 school year, this is when my school nurses assisted and collected body mass index growth percentages by grade level and CMS. Basically, we measured BMI. In 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, realized that 37, 42, and 36% of my middle school students were either overweight or obese. And I shared that in my budget proposal. I used local school data, which is key to be able to get funding. I also shared the percentages of students by grade level who did not meet the healthy fitness zone on their fitness test scores. And how I was able to do that is that we have that WellNet data analysis module that I was able to crunch those numbers and to analyze my own district data to be able to show local data and to tell a compelling story. This was key for me. I try to get as much data and tell that data into a story to convince district leaders to fund my projects. I'll pass this one for now due to time, but some suggested steps that just for those who are listening and viewing is research the funding available for your school district. Get noticed, advocate, and bring positive attention. Use those social media platforms. Tag your school board members, tag associate superintendents, tag your school district. Don't wait for funding before you create an equipment or curriculum priority list. Create it now. In case you get funding today, you are ready of what you need for your equipment and curriculum. Sometimes funding, literally, I was told funding 8 a.m. one morning and I had to 3 o'clock that afternoon to spend it. So be ready, have it ready. Don't wait for funding, do it now. Contact your district federal funding department. When you do write up budget requests, again, include that district messaging and initiatives. And if you get federal funding, and honestly, local and state funding, you've got to follow all purchasing guidelines. Federal funding has a few more steps you have to complete because districts are audited on how they're spending that money to ensure it's spent the way it's supposed to be spent. So follow those purchasing guidelines. Most importantly, do not leave money on the table. Thousands and thousands of dollars go unspent and are returned. Don't leave money on the table. Even when you think something's a long shot and you don't think you have a chance, just no does not mean no forever. You will eventually get those funding victories and you will strike it rich. Trust me.
Zozos is next after 3 quarters in 1 minute 10 and 4 seconds. And now at the center comes splitting horses and is moving up quickly as Brown Pride takes the lead around the far turn. It is Brown Pride battling with Messier. They're stride for stride. Epicenter and Zozos in behind them. Cybernet sweeps up to the outside. Sandon gets the rail run and they're into the stretch. And it's Messier, Brown Pride, and Epicenter is coming up on the outside. Epicenter has taken the lead as they arrive into the final furlong. Sandon is coming after him. Epicenter and Sandon, these two, stride for stride. Simplification on the outside is next. And coming down to the wire, Epicenter Sandon. Rich Strike is coming up on the inside. Oh my goodness, the longest shot has won the Kentucky Derby.
So
Zozos is next after 3 quarters in 1 minute.
So have grit, perseverance, and trust me, no is not no forever. You will strike it rich and your funding will get approved someday. So question and answer time. Ron, and we'll just keep this short. I know that we're going to reply to some of the questions, that we could follow up through email, but is there any burning commonly asked questions?
Well, if you could answer this in 20 seconds or less, Kim, how do people know where the funding is to submit a grant? How do they know how much the district has?
So you will get a link to the slide deck. On those suggested steps slide, I incorporated a link that says funding resources that are going to each school district. Click on that so that you know how much of that American Rescue Plan and ESSER funding is already been provided to your district. But in a quick answer, contact your federal funding department. Contact them to say, I want to, access ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funding. So contact that federal funding department. Make them your friends. Remember, build those relationships. If you fail to build relationships, you fail your mission. So contact them.
Thank you, Kim. If you could just move to the next slide. We know that we're over time, so real quick, you will be getting a WellNet demo site. It'll be sent to you in an email so you can check it out and see if there's value there. Like Kim said, to pull valuable data to support your direction that you're wanting to go for funding. And then also I'm going to turn it over to Tom.
Okay, thanks, Ron. I'm Tom Strenger on behalf of my fellow PE specialist, Danny Rad. I just want to give a special thanks to Kim. Great presentation, great story. We really appreciate your efforts and all the good information that you shared. So thank you for that. To all of our attendees, thank you for spending some time with us today. Hopefully we've provided you with some useful information. This is the first of what will be an ongoing series of webinars that Danny and I will be hosting. So we look forward to seeing you in the future. Until then, please contact us. Let us know how we can help you in your programs. Our emails are on the screen. Enjoy the last few days of the school year, get some rest, have some fun this summer. Everyone knows you all deserve it. So take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.